So, Destiny, I was trying to look up your stuff on Twitch, and it seems you're banned for saying faggot. And then I also was like, oh, I'll go see what his thoughts on this on Twitter are. And I couldn't find you on Twitter either. It's like the whole social media world is
Destiny, have you been misbehaving?
Listen, I'm a very opinionated person, and I come from an older... You guys know, you're older guys. The internet was a much different place a decade ago, okay? Mm-hmm. Such that if you guys were on the internet a decade ago, I think I can confidently say that if people would release logs of any one of the four of us from that time period, we would have to evacuate the internet.
I refuse to change. I refuse to change. If you've seen Clerks 2, the guy's like he discovers that porch monkeys is a terrible thing to say. He'd never known that before, and he's like, "Well, bullshit. Sure. It doesn't mean anything about black people. That's just something I say about lazy people." He starts a little personal campaign with the world. He's like, "I'm taking it back, porch monkeys." We need to do that with faggot because it doesn't mean gay people. These people.
We're starting off real heavy, aren't we?
First of all,
this isn't even heavy.
And we're happy that Steve is in the front line of that fight.
Anyone who uses... Let me get this out. Anyone who uses the word faggot to refer to a homosexual is a faggot, okay? Faggot is what an asshole is. They're annoying pieces of shit that make the world a worse place for everyone else. Nobody has a problem with gay people anymore except for faggots.
So you're going like the South Park.
Wow, I see what you did there.
Who ride bikes. Yeah,
huh.
I think you're gonna fight an uphill battle on this one.
I thought it was pretty clever there. It might be a little nuanced for some of the people who choose not to understand.
Yeah.
Can the record show that I did not initiate this topic because
and you didn't say
my fans all said that I was gonna go full blown fucking politics right off the bat. I did not open this can of worms. Okay. I will say that the idea that all of us are cool with gay people is pretty interesting in light of a very recent Supreme Court ruling that had to do with a cake shop in Colorado. Though I'm not too sure if I would die on that hill that everybody in America is super cool with the gays, as we would call them, but.
Yeah, there's definitely pockets of people who aren't cool with gays still. I think that's like a losing battle, the same way like guns are a losing battle.
It's clear to me that anyone who makes cakes for a living is probably gay and self-hating, and that was the genesis of all of that.
That doesn't seem like as much of a gay issue as it is a free speech issue, though, right? Because like they had ruled the other way when people refused to make anti-gay cakes, right? Like they're like, whoa, he doesn't have to make that cake.
Who's ordering anti-gay cakes? What would that have on it?
I've never heard this as a Supreme Court thing.
We weren't going to bring that up.
It's interesting that the same group of people that were so upset about the gay cake baker thing seemed to be very upset when Huckabee was ejected from a restaurant. When Sarah Huckabee was ejected, where was the free speech people there? It kind of makes you think,
You're totally right. I agree. Glaring hypocrisy. They had every right to tell her to fuck off and leave.
It turns out, so maybe you guys can correct me on the Supreme Court ruling, but my understanding is the reason he wasn't forced to do that was that it was an art. Like you can't force a guy to like commission an art piece, which is what a cake is. Now, if he wanted to go in there and buy a cake off the shelf, they would force him to sell it because you can't discriminate on a couple of grounds. They include sexual preference, race, sex, age, I think, is one of them. Disabilities is one of them. Yeah. The government has defined things that you're not allowed to discriminate for, but you are allowed to discriminate against douchebags, which is why they would have to sell an off-the-shelf cake to a gay person, but not necessarily Sarah Huckabee Sanders, because you are allowed to discriminate based on douchebaggery.
I mean, I think
they're not a protected group, funny. It turns out.
Which is why I'm no longer allowed at Applebee's.
Okay, so I love and appreciate you, Woody, but everything you just said was so completely wrong. I feel like I'm stepping into all of my triggers here. This is a very popular piece of fake news that a lot of conservatives are spreading about that Supreme Court ruling. So the initial question constitutionally that a lot of people had was, can you compel someone to create art? And if you can, or more importantly, just creating a cake, does that count as compelled art, right? And this is what we were kind of looking to the Supreme Court to decide. Can a baker be forced to bake a cake for a gay person with a gay message? Does that count as compelled art? But the reality was that Supreme Court decision didn't make a ruling on that. So the ruling was called narrow, and a lot of people don't understand what that means because the ruling was actually 7-2, so it wasn't like close. What the narrow ruling meant was that in this very particular case, The Supreme Court decided that the Colorado Commission that was in charge of deciding whether or not that was a hate crime treated the baker incredibly unfairly. That they had made disparaging remarks regarding the guy's religion, and that the Supreme Court didn't feel like the Colorado Commission made a fair ruling in this particular case. So the Supreme Court did not make any statements whatsoever on whether or not baking a cake for a gay person is compelled speech, or whether or not that sort of art is like compelled speech. And the ruling only specifically applied to this case of whether or not the Colorado Commission treated that case fairly.
Okay.
Yeah, I did hear that it was, everybody thought, because I saw plenty of conservatives tweeting stuff like, they're calling a 7-2 narrow, trying to trick you. And it's like, well, no, that's not what that means. It's just the scope of what they decided.
Okay, so Supreme Court decisions aside, where do we fall upon this idea? I have a couple of scenarios to lay out there that I'd like to hear people's opinions on. Let's say I go into a baker and I say, hey, I'm marrying my friend Taylor, my life partner Taylor.
Finally.
I wanted to say Kyle and Taylor, forever, and fondant, and I want 2 grooms on the top, and I want interlinking male gender symbols also in fondant, all the fuck over it, and they say no. Can they be compelled to make that cake? And also, a second cake is being commissioned that day. This time, Woody is getting the cake commissioned. His cake says homosexuality is an abomination, and it's got and
What a festive cake.
It's just a white sheet.
It really
cake.
seems like be Steve's cake, but carry on.
It's just a white sheet cake, nothing fancy. It just says homosexuality is an abomination, and they're like, no, absolutely not. I will not make that cake. Can either one of or both of those bakers be compelled, or should they be compelled to make these particular cakes?
Whew. Okay, so we're getting into the heavy social issues. In the United States, we have protected classes, and these protected classes generally call under special protections if they're discriminated against in certain matters. So,
Justice
for instance,
Anthony Kennedy
I believe race, religion, nation of origin, your sex, and then the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has ruled that this includes like sexual identity. So, like if you're gay or straight. Your familial status, if you've got kids, if you're a veteran, if you're disabled. These things are considered protected classes in the U.S. In the United States, what we've decided is that, thus far, we've decided that it is not considered free speech to discriminate against this group of people. So what that means is, let's say a gay dude comes into my restaurant and he's being a huge piece of shit. I can say, I want you to leave for no reason, or I can say, I want you to leave because you're being a piece of shit, or I want you to leave because you're a Democrat or a Republican. But you can't say, I want you to leave because you're black, or I want you to leave because you are from the country of India, or I want you to leave because you're a man or gay or whatever, right? Those are generally the decisions that we've made so far in society in terms of like protecting classes of people. And, we can go into social reasons for whether or not this is a good or bad idea, but that's generally where we're at right now. So if you ask, I want to make a cake with interlinking genitalia, I mean, you can say no to this because as a bakery, maybe you just don't do genitalia on cakes.
Gender symbols. Like the circle.
No, I like Steve's idea more for our wedding.
Steve's into some weird shit. Do you not know how hard-ons work? You can't link them.
Oh, yes, you can if one's uncircumcised.
Some of those porn stars are
docking.
Pretty, shit.
Yeah, my mistake.
We're going to be talking. Damn it, Kyle, are you circumcised?
Absolutely.
Me too. God damn it.
You're incompatible.
You need a lot of foreskin to dock 2 hard dicks. I don't know. But yeah, so like if somebody came in and they were just like, I want a cake, like you could say that like I don't do like those types of symbols. So like I could do a cake with 2 guys and no problem. But in terms of like adding like interlinking gender symbols, I don't know if maybe that you could say like that's the policy. Basically, as long as you're not discriminating against a certain class of people that we've decided are protected classes, you're generally okay to do what you want. But it's when you're discriminating against somebody on the basis of what we've decided is a protected class. In the U.S., we generally decide that's not an okay thing to do.
If like they get like an incendiary, like to Kyle's point, that message on the sheet cake that Woody got, if Woody was like, hey, I'm going to my religious event and we're talking about how much gays are ruining the world and terrible, and that's why we need this on there, would they be able to say, no, I'm not doing that? Or
so like you could say,
well, that is your religious right.
Sure. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an ACLU guy. So someone can correct me if I'm wrong. If someone in chat reads this later or on the YouTube comments or whatever, you could say, no, I don't want to do that type of message because, I consider that to be offensive or whatever. And that doesn't include like, just because of a protected class or whatever. But you wouldn't be able to say, I don't want to do that cake because I don't do cakes for religious people. So that I think that would be the distinguishing line there, which
Could
seems
they
kind
get
of fine,
out of
but
this
that's
kind of stuff just by like changing their real motive, where they're like, I don't like the fact this guy's Muslim or whatever. I'm not going to bake his Muslim wedding cake or whatever, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, oh, you're being rude. You're being a piece of shit. Get out of here. And then they no recourse.
He comes in. He wants a groom and a tiny little bride.
yeah, you could yeah, people do this all the time when they fight about like workplace discrimination, right? Very rarely is somebody going to say, I'm firing you because you're a woman. You usually have to do like a big investigation to find out like, okay, well, this guy's fired like 82% of the women or something, and I can prove some sort of thing, right? It's usually more complicated than saying, you know, like, I'm discriminating against you because I hate the women or the gays or the whatever, Indian people or whatever.
Yeah, it seems like all these companies can still, if they want to turn down service, they'll find a workaround for it.
All right.
Well,
all right.
yeah,
most
you basically
people-
just say fuck you, I don't want to serve you, leave. That's it. You
But
can just
beyond-
say that.
But beyond the legality, I want opinions. Our opinions. We are now the Supreme Court. Just the four of us. Forget the fact that's not the rest of them have been killed. There are a few. The four of us have to make a decision on this. Now, personally, where I stand is neither one of those bakers should have to make that cake. The baker shouldn't have to make the cake with myself and Taylor on the top, and he also should not have to make Woody's hate cake.
Christ, Woody.
My bad. I was born hateful. It's not my fault.
So I guess or sorry, you go first.
See that the whole art side of it changes it a bit for me. Like I kind of like the way they handle discrimination. So I feel like they have it right. You can't discriminate based on age, sex, disability, sexual orientation, etc. Should he? But you know, if I commission a painting that's against what you like, fuck it. I think it's funnier if you're forced to do things you hate. So there's my answer.
What a terrible rationale.
Hey, you know what? This is a lifetime appointment. I can use any rationale I want.
Oh, that's true. We can just be bonkers up here. Gay marriage legal. Gay divorce, nay, nay. That decision is made, my friend. Oh, man, we'd be a great Supreme. Well, no, the country would be a shambles.
The compelled art question is like really interesting. I personally don't know. I would have to think for a long time about that because we almost have to answer like unanswerable questions like what is art, you know? Say, for instance, we say, okay, well, you know, this is clearly art. You know, commissioning a design on a cake is art. We should be allowed to do that. How far could you take that? Like, say I go to get a bouquet of flowers, right? Well, is it art in the way the guy decides to arrange it? Say I decide I want to get a new paint job done on my car. Is it art to get like my car spray paint? Like, I feel like that argument could be stretched to uncomfortable lengths. Maybe I'm not entirely sure on that. But on the flip side, you know, should somebody be able to commission something like a painting that is clearly, you know, art?
I think
it's
a really hard blurred line. It's a really blurred line with what you just described because, like, I don't think painting my car red is artwork. However, I've seen those vans that have an entire like mosaic on the side,
or even
that's
the
clearly
flames.
Art. Or landscaping. Cutting a yard is not art, but cutting the shrubbery in like your Edward Scissorhands into like all kinds of like animals and stuff. That's art. I can't do that shit.
They face that with porn, right? In porn, there's a line that's really hard to distinguish between art and porn, right? You know, you can see a topless woman with the skirt on in the sunset, and it's art. It's art.
Well, I think you nailed it, Woody, because the age-old thing they say about porn is, I know it when I see it.
That's right.
And that was the Supreme Court litmus test. Yeah, I'll know it when I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that does it. I think that does it across the board with all of the things we just discussed. Because I can look at landscaping, and I know artful landscaping when I see it. A golf course isn't artful. I mean, they cut it. My yard isn't artful. But, like, and I'll go back to Edward Scissorhands. That was art.
How it does seem like, to Steve's point, you could just infinitely reduce this, where it's like, hey, you just mowed my lawn. Yeah, but look at that. I did I'm riding this lawnmower. That's a skill. That's an art. And look at that cool little spiral I did over by your tree. You know, that's really neat.
It's a little gay.
It's a little gay. But like, you could like take the art. Like, I feel like it's easier. I know it when I see it is easier with porn than it is with art, just as a giant, you know.
I disagree.
Maybe we're